Awesome. Hello, everybody. Today, I'll be doing a quick presentation, probably only for 20 minutes, on the lucrative world of legal hacking, also known as bug bounties. So, who am I? I am Sean. You may have seen me around today. I'm currently hiring for Assetnote. I'm currently an engineering manager, meaning I look after our team of engineers building our wonderful product. If you'd like to hear more, I'll be more than happy to explain to you outside at our tiny booth. I frequently do bug bounties, well, I infrequently now do bug bounties in my spare time, but I spend most of that automating what I want to do. And I'm generally just a full-time digital degenerate, so I just shitpost on Twitter a lot. Who was I? I'm a UNSW alumni. I graduated in 2020. SCONES doesn't run anymore, but it used to be a CTF run across unis with a lot of prestige and a lot of hype, but now it doesn't run anymore. I used to teach 6443, 6843, 6447, and 9447. Unfortunately, I don't teach those courses anymore, but I'll be more than happy to answer any questions about things you'd be interested in about learning at uni. I'd love your HSPs at the Quad. It's been a couple of years. And I've previously interned at Microsoft doing security engineering. So, what are we doing here today? Today, I'll be going over a brief explanation of what bug bounties are. Like, what is this crazy new field? Is this just blackmail? I don't know. I'll be talking about my first bug bounty and what I did to get started in this field. I'll be talking about some other bugs I found as I sort of expanded my scope in the bug bounty world. And then after that, I'll go through a few quick tips about how you can get started with bug bounties and sort of just get into this field and understand like what is so great about it. After that, I'll answer any questions, and that'll be the end of the talk. So hopefully this doesn't take too long, but hopefully you guys come away with something that's interesting. So let's start with, what are bug bounties? Bug bounties is where you, a digital degenerate like myself, are sitting at home on the internet, and then you go browse some websites that are run by these large tech companies, for example, Microsoft, Facebook, or Uber, and then you find security vulnerabilities in their products, and they give you money. Now that sounds like a gross oversimplification of this entire industry and financial model, so let's go into a little more detail. This consists of you being random blokes on the internet, or what we call security researchers, responsibly disclosing security vulnerabilities to companies. And based on the severity and the impact of what you found, you'll be paid a bounty discretionally. Now you may be wondering, what do you mean security bloke? Like, what is a security researcher? What's a random bloke? It literally is just random, gender agnostic blokes on the internet. Anyone with a computer can do bug bounties. There's no special equipment needed. You don't need an SDR. You don't need like some crazy hardware hacking kit. All you need is just your browser, your eyes, and a good inquisitive mind. And you also need an insecure web app, which is obviously where we're going to find our bugs. So you may be thinking, what kind of bugs are you looking for? Is this just stuff like, the search doesn't work properly, my mobile, it doesn't work on my phone? No, what we're looking for are security bugs. So these can be things like you can hijack someone's account, you can find arbitrary JavaScript execution on Google search, you can bypass authentication mechanisms. These kinds of things are ultimately things that affect other users on the platform or have some kind of security impact to a company. That's what they're kind of looking for. And you may be wondering, well, okay, sure, some of these companies are big names, but who is paying for these bug bounties? It can't just be big companies. No, it's all sorts of companies. We have all the big names in the industry that have internet-facing properties. You have Microsoft, you have Google, you have your Uber, you have Riot Games, you have Facebook. Even governments are getting into this bug bounty space. And they're sort of breaking into this field of we sort of want to have people start hacking on our platforms with our permission in a controlled way so we can actually make our systems more secure and incentivize people to do it and not just dump all the data on the darknet. So that's sort of where they're coming from, and that's sort of what we're trying to get to. And what you'll realize is as you sort of explore the bug bounty field, more and more companies that you thought would never have a bug bounty program actually do have one. But you probably still may be thinking okay, sure, we're trying to hack things. Maybe I understand there's companies that I can hack for, like PwC does consulting. We have a whole bunch of companies here that say they do security work. But isn't hacking just illegal? Yes, hacking is illegal, but the companies that you're doing bug bounties for have programs that are called bug bounty programs or called responsible disclosure programs. And what these are is they're pretty much systems and rules set in place so people like you can go and hack on these websites within a certain set of rules. And often this set of rules consist of you have a fixed amount of scope, so there's some things you can attack and some things you can't. For example, companies like Atlassian might say that the bug bounty allows you to look at products like Confluence or Jira, but you're not allowed to attack actual customers' instances of Confluence in Jira. So there are some rules that you have to play by. And some other rules include like, don't leak the customer information you find on the internet. Tell us first before you find it, like before you tell anybody else. And there may be other conditions attached that are more restrictive, like you can't talk about the bugs that you find unless we give you permission to. So this is sort of the realm of bug bounty, and this is how you avoid the AFP knocking on your door when you find bugs in like a bank. Because you'll go through these responsible disclosure programs, you go through these like set of rules and guidelines that companies have put in place that allow people to disclose security vulnerabilities without enforcing legal action and getting yourself sued. The other thing to note is we call it security research, not hacking. So that way, when people say, oh, you're a hacker, they don't immediately invoke the image of you in a black hoodie in a dark room. Although that may be how I do most of my hacking. So the long story short is hacking illegal? Yes, but technically we're allowed to here. Now, I sort of explained a little bit of what responsible disclosure is, but the general rules that you'll find when going into bug bounty programs and what these responsible disclosure programs are like is that if you play by the rules, they won't send lawyers after you, which is usually you report it to the company first, and then they'll tell you what you're allowed to do. You don't do anything malicious with what you find. You don't, cause disruption to the service. You don't cause other users grief, and you can't tell people about what you found unless the company explicitly says you can. Now then you may be wondering, okay, so I've now found this bug, I've gone to this company, I've reported to them, and now I kind of want to get paid. That sounds a lot like blackmail. And the definition of blackmail is an action treated as a criminal offense of demanding payment or another benefit in return for not revealing compromising or damaging information about them. Thank you, Google Dictionary. The answer is, no, this isn't blackmail, we're not criminals. The first thing is companies have programs that we hack within rules. The payment is at discretion of the company, so we're not demanding anything, although sometimes we may debate what the value of our impact is. And lastly, we don't actually threaten any companies to disclose information. That's actually blackmail and actually illegal. So we don't step into this realm of actually doing things illegal. We have a clear set of rules. We have morals. People call us white hat hackers, whatever that means, that kind of stuff. Okay, so now we know that it's not illegal and it's not blackmail, and we have this security thing that we want to find bugs in these companies and we want to make money. Sign me up. So what does this process look like? If you find a bug, typically what you do is you'll write up a report, which doesn't have to be too long, maybe like 2 or 3 pages, that just says what the impact is, what you found. Maybe you can leak all the customers' credit card data. And then you need to list out how you can reproduce it. So maybe I go to this S3 bucket that says customer data.xl, and then it gives me all the customer data. Crazy. How do you report this bug and who do you report it to? So I sort of oversimplified a little bit when I said bug bounties is just run by these companies. Typically what happens is that these companies go through an intermediary or a platform like HackerOne or BugCrowd. I'll go through some more later. And sort of these platforms manage this entire bug bounty process. They sort of act as an interface between researchers like yourselves and the companies that want people to look at their software in that platform. So what happens is you go to HackerOne and find the Riot Games program and say, I found a bug in League of Legends. This champion is broken. And then they say, I agree, this champion is broken. This is a bad security bug. This should be fixed. We will fix it. And now that they've fixed it, they'll give you lots of money. Easy. So now you're wondering, well, who are these platforms? What do they do? I've named one of them. One of them is HackerOne. Other ones that include is BugCrowd and Integrity, and these are just sort of different names. It's kind of like the difference between DoorDash and Uber. They're just different platforms that have companies on them. So these are places where lots of companies aggregate. Different companies will be on different platforms. So maybe you want to report to PayPal. You can only report to them on HackerOne. Or maybe you want to report to, I don't know, Indeed or some other company, and it'll be only on BugCrowd. So depending on what company you're looking for, you need to find the right program, but often they'll be on one of these platforms. Okay, so that sounds really hard. And a lot of these things sound like they're really complex, right? Do I have to be really good at security to find this? No. Aren't all the bugs already gone? Because if this was such a lucrative industry, wouldn't everyone be doing this and making all the money already? No, there's plenty of bugs, there's plenty of bad software engineers. Don't have to be a complete genius to find these bugs that make me millions. No, there's plenty of low-hanging fruit and easy bugs that won't make you millions yet, but still is a decent amount of money if you're just getting into the field. And I'm a uni student, I don't have time for this, isn't this too hard? The answer is no. I got started when I was a uni student, and I know plenty of people that aren't even uni students yet that make a lucrative amount of money from bug bounties. So it is nowhere near as intimidating, and all you need is your curiosity and your time commitment. So let's dive into some examples of what my first bug bounty was like. My background is before university, long time ago in 2015, I had done no security and no programming whatsoever before I started uni. All I did was play copious amounts of League of Legends and StarCraft. This was inordinate numbers of hours, but I still wasn't very good despite that. So I came to UNSW with zero idea of what I wanted to do with myself, and I learned about programming and information security and all this hacking stuff purely through uni. So how did I get started? In 2015, I rocked up and came to a talk very much like this one. One of now my friends and my boss, who runs the company that I'm working at, did a similar talk where he spoke about how he dropped out of uni, quit his job at Hungry Jack's to go start finding bugs full-time. Now, I don't recommend taking that path. It is very difficult and time-consuming, and is very stressful to have your only source of income be from bug bounties, but it is a viable career choice if you choose to do so. And he went through a talk titled about how he made money. And I like money. Who doesn't? At the beginning of uni, I also had no money. And he spoke about finding bugs on a certain large gaming company. So we'll call them CLG.co. I know CLG.co. At that point in time, I played a lot of games, and I was very familiar with CLG.co. And I heard that this company paid pretty big bounties. Like, they paid $2,000 to $5,000 to $10,000 for every security bug you found on their platform. Now, when I first started finding my bugs, I just copy-pasted bugs off the internet. What I did was, during that time, I watched the talk and I was super interested and I did a whole bunch of Googling. And what I found was like there was a whole bunch of these blog posts coming out about like different security vulnerabilities. And I just started reading through stuff. And like admittedly, I didn't really understand everything I was reading. I'd be like, okay, I see like you're doing a whole bunch of steps. And there was this like one bug that I read about, which was like this DigitalOcean bug, where you could like reuse a coupon code a whole bunch of times. And I'm like, I have no idea how this is working or why this is working. I just know that if I spam this really, really fast, this bug will happen. And I was thinking like, okay, well, where else can I like spam something for like a coupon code or like use a store? I was like, oh shit, CLG Co has a store related to the game. It's like, maybe I can use the same idea. So what I did was I booted up my game, and in the top right, you will notice that there is a price. And here we can see I have 1,650 tokens, points, whatever they may be. And I was thinking to myself, what can I do with this? What I realized was, instead of submitting coupons, I could just submit requests to buy things. So in this, I just then decided to submit a whole bunch of requests all at once. And I don't know if you can read it here, but you can see that in the middle, there's like this field that says cost. And a lot of them say 1, and then one of them says like 26 ... and you can't see the rest. So I spammed all of these at once, and effectively what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to buy a whole bunch of cheap stuff with one really expensive thing at the same time. And I'd submit all of these requests at the same time, and what ended up happening was I managed to buy 1 unit of something for only 3 points, instead of however many 2,600 points it actually cost. And I was like, holy shit, I don't know what I just did. I just copy-pasted this report and did the same thing in like this game I play. I can't believe this actually worked. This is crazy. And like the euphoria was insane, and at that point I may have had like slight heroin, no, not heroin, bug bounty addiction. And at that point, like, you know, the dopamine gets going and you're like, okay, well, what do I do now? I've got this bug, it's really exciting, what do I do with it? I asked my friend for help. And he's like, look, I know like you probably have no experience writing reports, so here, take this report format I have, remove all the details about the stuff that's unrelated, copy paste what you found into that report, and it was pretty much just I described. Like you described like what you did, what the vulnerability is, and like how you did it, and like what the impact is. Now, after that is a little bit of a lull, like it took them a couple months. But I kind of forgot about it after going back and forth and explaining. A few months later, they come back to me and say, thanks for resolving this issue, here's $2,000 US. And I'm like, holy shit, all I did was copy paste something off the internet I found on one evening, and now I made $2,000 US. So this was a second spike of dopamine where you realize that I now found something that was super easy, but I can also get paid for finding that thing. And now I'm really looking for the next hit. So that was my first foray into bug bounties. And it really is Like, I mean, I say it's that easy, but maybe I was very lucky. I think these days there's still plenty of things that you can hack. And going forwards, we'll start talking about how I expanded my view outside of just the video games that I play. So now we're going to talk about going a little more worldwide. So at this point, I started collaborating with my friend, now our CTO, on certain bugs. And what we started doing was we started like expanding our scope wider and wider. We no longer were concerned with like single like applications or one specific thing. We started broadening our scope to look at like more and more things. And what we started doing was we started looking at a certain transport company that had branches in multiple countries. And they was like rapidly expanding at that time, and they were like starting to contract a whole bunch of different entities to manage transport across different countries. What we found was transportco.ru was the Russian contracted division of this company. And prior to like transport.co releasing a feature that lets you manage like businesses or like a whole group of employees, the Russian entity already had like this feature where you could manage a whole bunch of people underneath you using their product. So what we found was there was this website called Bot API transport.co.ru, which was related to a Telegram bot. And at the time, it was kind of crazy to have a Telegram bot. But what this was just a random bot that on Telegram that was kind of linked to transport.co, but allowed you to manage like a fleet of drivers. And as you can see, here's my coworker struggling to communicate in Russian with a bot that he had no idea what he was communicating with or what he was reading, and he was just sending random data. What we found was, as we started to interact with this bot, the functionality started to get more and more peculiar. Like you would follow links onto a certain website, and then once you started getting to that website, things started to get more and more odd, as if like, you know, the developer forgot a lot of things while they were building something, or they were just like an intern and they weren't building something very well. So what do you mean? Like, is there this dirty box? Like, what's so dirty about it? Well, on this box, there was directory listings that showed you all of the source code of the website. And we're like, no, you got to be kidding me. Like, these files can't actually be the source code. No, it was the PHP source code of this website. And this was the same website that when you clicked on from the Telegram bot just took you to this site that like had some of these pages that you could access. So as we started looking at this box, we started digging around, clicking through random files, and then we started finding more and more dodgy things. Like there were these test2.php scripts that obviously started dumping some kind of customer data. Now, neither me nor my coworker spoke Russian, but we could sort of guess these are names and maybe they're like ID numbers. And we're like, okay, like what other dodgy stuff is there? If you kept digging, you could see there's this really dodgy endpoint that's like test.php, and then it just spewed out a bunch of like random data. And we're like, okay, I don't really know what this random data is. Maybe there's some like objects here, but there's this really interesting thing called like a spreadsheet ID. I don't know if you can see it, but yeah, this is like really high entropy, like uppercase, lowercase, alphanumeric string, and I'm like, well, like what could this spreadsheet ID even be? Like I have no idea how this relates to web application. And then one of us had the genius idea, well, what if this spreadsheet idea is actually just a spreadsheet? And like, okay, well, what do you mean a spreadsheet? It's like, you know, Google Sheets, right? It's like, oh, shit, okay. It's actually Google Sheets. So what we eventually figured out from reading this was this Telegram bot that was managing a whole bunch of users was actually backed by not a database, you know, not a flat file system, was backed by a Google spreadsheet. And what we found was this spreadsheet contained all of the billing information, all of the addresses, all the email addresses, all the phone numbers for every single one of the employees under this managed system. And I don't know how familiar you are guys with banking, but there are two numbers that are really bad in banking that people don't want you to know, which is your IBAN number and I don't know, I forgot the other number's name, but your IBAN number. Effectively what it means is these numbers are used between banks internationally to initiate wire transfers. So in Australia, we have this neat thing where you can use PayID, but in the United States and in every other country, to initiate a bank transfer, you need to know someone's IBAN and their account number. With that, you can actually initiate a transfer on their behalf to move money between their accounts internationally. So effectively what we found was a great way to pay ourselves from every single person's account in Russia. Now, naturally, if we went down that path, that would be very illegal. And we're not criminals, so we didn't do that. Instead, what we did was we reported this bug to this organization and said, yes, technically we understand that transportcompany.co.russia isn't transportcompany.co. But at the end of the day, all of these users are users of transport.co, and we have all of their banking detail. We think this is kind of bad. They ended up agreeing and said, yes, this is very bad, we should definitely fix this. So they went and fixed it with their contracted company, and we got a sweet $4,500 for all of our efforts. So that was our adventure into slowly expanding the scope beyond the realm of just individual apps, but looking beyond and finding things maybe slightly outside of what your initial expectations are, but still a very valid critical vulnerability nonetheless. So now you may be thinking, Sean, that's really cool. Like, you've done two really cool things. How the hell do I get started? So what I recommend is if you have no experience in security, I think first you need to start building an understanding of how to get into this industry. And like bug bounties, as much as I've said is super easy and finding these things isn't hard, I think you still need a first fundamental understanding of like what is a security vulnerability. Because you may be staring a $10,000 bug in the face, but if you don't know it's a security bug, you can't take the $10,000. So what I recommend is most things you're looking for are web applications in the bug bounty space. So if you're interested in web applications, in writing web software, in web security, then this is definitely the place for you. If you're more interested in social engineering, then you might be a little out of luck because bug bounties don't really fall into the social engineering space. What we find is that web application security is a huge space to navigate. There's so many different aspects to it. There's so many different kinds of techniques and exploits, and the field is constantly changing. There may be server-side, there may be client-side issues, there may be cloud platform-specific issues. And you may be thinking, like, this is very overwhelming. How do I sort of get started? What I recommend is sort of starting at the beginning. There are a few really good practical workshops. There are CTFs. There's the Portswigger Web Security Academy, which is a great way to get an introduction to specific techniques that you can then start applying. And there's also things like Pentester Lab that sort of let you expand your skills. From here, what I would recommend is if you prefer specializing in something and understanding one thing really deeply, then take one set of skills that you're really interested in. Maybe it's like specifically client-side bugs, things that exploit the browser, things that exploit like JavaScript, and taking those and trying to spread that across as many things as you're deeply understanding. The alternative is you go really wide and you start trying to build out all your automation and tooling to try to cover as much space as you can and then processing and filtering that down. Depending on like what your appetite is and how much time you invest, I think you'll get varying results. Some people are really good at investing their time into one specific technique, and there are plenty of very brilliant hackers I know that can do something like they'll go to Twitter, they'll just start typing random things, to me totally random, to them very calculated and crafted, and then they'll find a bug just by posting a tweet. Whereas other people can spend hours just grinding through tens of thousands of websites and just spraying their content everywhere. So it sort of depends on what your interests are and what your skills are. But then you maybe want to say, okay, I will eventually have some of these skills. I'll have some knowledge of like a web security technique. Like, what do I know what I want to hack? To get started, what I recommend is starting with something you're familiar with. For me, it was starting with video games because I played so much of them, and I felt like I had a very good understanding of like how different parts of the video game fit together. I thought there were parts of the video game that normal people that were doing security research wouldn't be exposed to or wouldn't know. Maybe there's something hidden away deep within inside the application that only I know about. And then once you're sort of picking a target that you have more familiarity with, something that you understand a little bit more deeply, then that's where you probably will start building your edge, right? Because at that point, you're no longer competing with every single bloke on the internet. You're competing with a select few of people that also understand this problem and are also interested in security, which gradually smallens those circles to the point where it's like, yeah, maybe I'm only competing at two or other three people for this specific area that maybe there are bugs in. Once you start being focused and start understanding like, well, I'm very interested in like, I don't know, mapping software or like Google Maps for a great example to start. And like, I'm very intimately aware of like how the internals of Google Maps works, how it communicates with things, then you can start looking for bugs there. And then once you start building that specialty is where you start building a deeper understanding of how things fit together. Maybe there's a special calling convention. Maybe there's a specific programming paradigm they use. Maybe there's a way to read out source that other people don't know about. That understanding is where you build your edge and where you can start like carving out your niche of bug bounties. The final part, obviously, is writing a high-quality report. And what I've learned over the last few years is that the difference between submitting a crap report and an excellent report is actually a few $1,000s. if you can justify to the company that you found the bug in, that what you found is way more severe than they can even realize. If what they think is like a really minor bug that doesn't affect a few people, and you can actually escalate that to affect tens of thousands of people, then the value of your payout will change drastically, from maybe a few $100s to a few tens of thousands of dollars. And I've seen this happen plenty of times where often we'll submit something, they won't initially understand what the impact of what we found is, and as we've escalated and explained what the impact is, they've come to the realization that, shit, this is way worse than we initially thought it was. So the most important thing is when writing these reports to be able to convey that degree of impact and convey that degree of effect what you found has. We've often found that the other side is when you write reports that are easy to understand, easy to remediate and replicate, then they're very glad that you've submitted something useful. Instead of just submitting, garbage, you've actually submitted something that they can action upon, they might actually decide to award a discretionary bonus. Because the side you don't see is on the other side, maybe at Google or at Microsoft, they're actually receiving hundreds of these reports every day from people that probably turned their brain off, decided to run an off-the-shelf security scanner against, Microsoft.com, and then it says, your TLS certificate actually has the wrong version. This is a great security vulnerability. And they're like, thank you for wasting my time. Why did I open this email? But instead, if you submit a high-quality report that says, I found a way to take over an account in Azure, here's the exact steps for replication, and here's the full impact, then they're going to be way more appreciative of the time and effort you put into it, and they're also more likely to give you a small bounty. Where I say a small bounty is maybe a few $100 to a few $1,000s. So over time, I've learned that putting a good effort into making these reports valuable, high signal, and clear of what I've found and how to reproduce it has taken me a long way to maximizing what my payouts have been. So to summarize, your high quality report usually should contain a brief summary, maybe in 1 or 2 sentences, of what the bug is, steps to reproduce how you got this bug in great detail and exactly what you did, some supporting materials about what you've found. So for example, in the case of my race condition bug a long time ago, I submitted all the documentation about race conditions and tried to explain what kind of bug this is, how this bug occurs, what remediations are, and how you would solve it. And finally, of course, is the impact of why it's bad, what this affects, and why should I not disclose this publicly, because I definitely won't do that since that's illegal. So that being said, I think this concludes my very quick explanation of what bug bounties are, and hopefully through this few examples that only yielded a few $1,000s, although to a uni student at my time, that few $1,000s was literally the cost of my semester. I hope you have an interest in bug bounties and have plenty of questions. So yes, any questions that people have got? Otherwise, thank you for listening to my talk. Yes, start at the back.
What was your time period like between successful bounties?
It largely depends on how lucky I am. Sometimes, for example, in the first case of the race condition bug, it was only a few days. At that point, I only just started researching what race conditions were. I had no idea that bug even existed. And then from there, I just started trying different things. It was only a few days. Other times, it can be a few months, where I'll be thinking about a potential way to exploit a particular system. Earlier today, you heard about exploits against CI/CD. Last year, I submitted a whole bunch of bugs against CI/CD, walked away with 10, 15 grand, and then spent the next 9 months looking for the next CI/CD bug. So it can vary depending on what you're looking for, how much time you're dedicating, and kind of your luck at the time. But then again, when I say 9 months, it was kind of on and off. Every week, I might spend a couple hours looking at it. Whereas if I'm, for example, really dedicated into the bug bounty space at that time, I might be investing a few hours every day, and I might only find something after a week or two. So the time investment changes a lot, and it sort of depends on both your luck and where you're looking. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Awesome. Yes?
Can you tell us what you chose to specialize in?
So currently, at the time, I had the choice between looking at broader categories, not so much web specifically, but binary exploitation, web security, or forensics. At the time, my CTF team composed of 3 to 4 people that were really, really good at binary exploitation, and everyone hated doing web. So I got shafted with doing all the web challenges, but who's laughing now? I think when I started doing web, I sort of tried to expand my experience as much as I could. I spent a lot of time looking at SQL injection and also server-side request forgery. Because at that time, sort of cloud stuff was only slightly gaining traction. And then the idea of like making arbitrary web requests on behalf of a server wasn't really a bug that was well understood. So there was a lot more scope there to start spamming things for things that might be vulnerable. But that's where I spent my time early on. Yes?
If you find a bug on a site that doesn't, like just, theoretically, that doesn't have a bug bounty, is there anything you could do, or should you just have to step away?
It depends. Depends on how much of a good you know the word, humanitarian you want to be. If it's something that you really are passionate about securing, for example, a bank, you have a few options. If they don't have a bug bounty program and you're worried about the AFP at your door, you can always submit through a body like OzCyber, or like some of these like larger entities that sort of manage vulnerabilities at a larger scale. And they'll sort of like proxy your request to the organization, letting you be a little bit anonymous. If you're a little more brave and you're trying to like, be a good Samaritan, like report responsibly, you can try emailing them directly. Maybe they have a security @ email. Maybe you can reach out to their CTO over Twitter. And in those cases, it's a much more delicate topic because you technically are doing something without permission. So you're trying your best to convey that I'm doing this in the best interest of securing the product that I may or may not use, and please don't sue me or send the police. So often the wording will be that, hi, I'm like a very devoted user of this product. I've found a security vulnerability here that I'd like to responsibly disclose to you. I haven't disclosed this to anyone else. I'm just interested in solving the issue. And then that's sort of how you would frame it. And maybe they'll be like a little empathetic and be like, thank you for your time, we'll fix this bug. Or they'll just completely ignore you and then you'll just pretend it never happened. But it's a touchy topic. If you have something that doesn't have like a responsible disclosure program or a bug bounty, yes, it's technically illegal at that point because you don't have permission to. So at which point you're treading on thin ice and depending on the appetite of the other person. Some organizations are very litigative, some are not. So your mileage may vary. Any other questions? Yes? It depends. Sometimes I've found that if they're using a platform like HackerOne, then it doesn't really matter because at the end of the day, some of these companies pay HackerOne to manage the bug bounty triage process for them. So they'll have like engineers or people at BugCrowd or HackerOne that will first read your report and then validate its findings and then pass it on. In those cases, it doesn't matter how much you submit. In other cases, building a report with a team sometimes helps you get bugs through a lot quicker. So for example, when I was finding bugs in CI/CD platforms, I built a pretty close report with the Cloudflare security team, and we managed to like, communicate a lot quicker. Even though through the platform, I was managed to get a lot quicker response times because of that. So also your mileage may vary, depends on the program, but you get a feel for it once you do more. There was a question up the back, I recall. Yes.
I was wondering, has there been times that you were selling, the bug bounty area that's like submitted a bug report, which is like you think is really vulnerable, like and have a high risk, but then the company kind of is like, oh, okay, it's $10. Like, it's very
Yeah. So to answer, to iterate the question for people outside the room, has there been times where I've submitted a bug and then the company thought the severity of the bug was a lot lower than what I thought it was, and then I got scammed? The answer is yes. That happens plenty of times. And in the end, you can't really do anything about it because it's a bug bounty and it's totally discretionary. What you can do is you can try to argue the impact, but sometimes they're just like, oh, but our policy is this, sorry, here's your $10. So yes, sometimes it sucks when you can take over thousands of accounts and they give you like a few $100, but you take what you can get. Yes. Any other questions? Yes?
So I know it's like BugCrowd and stuff. I've also had with companies like Zerodium. How does that they don't disclose what they do with the vulnerabilities, but
Yeah.
they want to sell to them. Like, what do you think of that? Would it make it, if you recommend that, and then if you should pay quite a bit, then make it harder to work with like a company disclose the bug with their like Zerodium?
So the question was like, should we use platforms like Zerodium that you disclose bugs to, they pay a much higher bounty for, but you don't know exactly what they do with the bug? The answer is usually they sell the bug to a government agency or some other malicious party. And then it comes down to, one, a question of economics, and two, a question of ethics. So in terms of the economics of it, Zerodium, in my personal opinion, isn't the best value. And the market is sort of adjusting to compensate people more fairly for the bugs. So for example, the historical milestone is Zerodium would pay $1 million for a bug in an iPhone, a bug being a remote code execution with no interaction. iPhone has now Apple has started to match that and say, like, we will also pay you $500,000, $1 million for the same kind of bug. So the incentives for reporting to Zerodium are a lot lower. The second part is whether it matches your moral values and, like, am I comfortable in selling this bug for any price, or am I here for security? In which case, that's more of a question for you. So does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm happy to talk about this more afterwards if you're interested. But any other questions? No? Awesome. Well, thank you for coming to my talk. If you're interested about bug bounty stuff or what we do at Assetnote, feel free to talk to me outside. We're hiring both interns and grads, and we're doing both engineering and security research. So feel free to come along. Thank you.